Welcome again to Engineers Newsletter Live. I'm Jeannie Harshaw from Trane System and Application Engineering Group. Today, our goal is to provide you with an overview of LEED version 4 and share some insight on how this may impact you, the HVAC designer. This course is approved by U.S. Green Building Council for 1.5 Green Building Certification Institute continuing education hours toward the LEED Credential Maintenance Program. The course today qualifies as LEED specific. After attending today's program, LEED professionals should submit their hours to GBCI. Today's program is also registered with the American Institute of Architects Continuing Education System and qualifies for Health, Safety, and Welfare credit. AIA members, please provide your member number to your local host before leaving today's session. And professional engineers, please check your state's rules to see if credit for attending today's program can be applied to engineers' continuing education requirements in your state. Today, Trane Applications engineers Chris Shea, Mick Schwedler, John Murphy, and a new face, CDS marketing engineer Charlie Jellin, will take us through a full discussion of LEED v4. We'll start with a very brief overview of LEED activity the past few years, then move into LEED v4 section by section and highlight changes and potential impact to you as a designer. As an organization, USGBC celebrated its 20th anniversary in 2013. Its growth no doubt fueled by environmental issues that continue to gain media attention. USGBC continues to attract the ears of policymakers and many volunteers. Key statistics shown here were highlighted in USGBC's 2012 annual report. These charts show the organization's growth in the last decade. In 2010 and 2011, the USGBC membership dropped due to economic recession, while the number of LEED professionals continues to grow. If we take a look at some green building trends, studies such as McGraw-Hill's 2013 World Green Building Trends suggests that green building growth around the world is not isolated to one particular region. This chart indicates that companies are shifting their business toward green building, with 51% of respondents planning more than 60% of their work to be green by 2015. This is a significant increase from the 28% in 2012. The data collected from 62 countries includes 698 AEC firms, owners, and specialists, and 105 manufacturers and suppliers. Now, from a global perspective, this graph illustrates the increase in firms intending to construct green projects. Singapore is leading with 89% of firms expecting more than 60% of their work to be green in 2015, and 53% of U.S. respondents indicate that level of green construction in 2015. On the project front, LEED registered and certified buildings continue on a steady path. The consistent growth over just the last 4 years is notable. This data is similar to other green building trend reports. As you can see, the discrepancy between registered and certified projects illustrates the intent of becoming certified. However, many of the projects face challenges making certification difficult. Many of you have worked on or assisted with LEED projects and understand some of these challenges. Nonetheless, as you can see, growth in green construction is expected worldwide. Chris, why don't you take it from here and give us a high-level overview of LEED version 4?
Thank you very much, Jeannie. For a quick snapshot of green building market, through an unprecedented 6 public review spanning over 3 years of development, LEED v4 is finally here. By the end of 2012, 40% of all LEED registered projects were located outside of the United States. To recognize the global marketplace, USGBC now includes metric units and alternative compliance paths. The grade level threshold and point structure are kept the same. The base number of points is 100, with 10 bonus points available. 4 levels of certification are shown in the slide. New and more stringent prerequisites and credits are included in this new version. LEED v4 builds its stretch goals as well. There are some difficult hurdles for a project team to meet some of the new credit requirements. We will provide some examples later. The online credit library is a simpler way for project team to share the specific credit language with each other. You can use filters to find the particular credit or prerequisite for a particular market segment. Each has its own unique URL so that you can easily share it by email. And finally, LEED keeps on expanding into different market sectors. Market-specific language has been added to the various building life cycle rating systems. This allows consistency throughout different phases of the building life cycle. For building design and construction, the sector-specific rating systems include new construction, core and shell, schools, retail, hospitality, data center, warehouses and distribution center, healthcare, homes, and mid-rise. Choosing the correct rating system to use is critical. USGBC shared that there has been several cases in the past project team were asked to revise their submission based on a different rating system. As you can imagine, such a setback could cause a huge headache and a very difficult conversation with the owner. The LEED V4 website includes a spreadsheet that can be downloaded. The tabs along the bottom show the points specific to each rating system. Remember to use the right one. This spreadsheet can be very useful for the project team and is often used to facilitate to target specific points during the design charrette. Here is a list of credit categories. Most of us the same with version 3, but LEED V4 adds a new credit called Integrative process. The idea is to continue pushing for an integrated project delivery process at the conceptual stage of a project so that the overall benefits can be maximized. The degree of change for LEED version 4 ranges from minor to major throughout the rating systems. Allow me just to highlight 2 changes here, and our team will explain in more details later. First, the all sustainable sites category has been split into 2 categories for V4, locations and transportation and sustainable sites. The goal was to make the category name more relevant to the credits. Secondly, the materials and resource category has a lot of changes, which attract most of the attention during the review periods. I will explain a little later. And following the tradition of the previous version, LEED V4 continues to include bonus points categories for innovation and regional priority credits. As I mentioned, LEED V4 covers virtually all types of buildings throughout the building life cycle. This chart gives you a quick glimpse of all points from the integrated process all the way to regional priority credits. The total points are 110, which includes the bonus points. Each bar represents a market sector in the LEED V4 building design and construction rating system. For those markets not specifically called out, the new construction or NC rating systems is used. You can see that the point distribution varies a bit. For example, LEED for healthcare awards more points in the EA and MR categories than LEED for new construction. For those of you familiar with the previous version of LEED, this side-by-side chart shows the V4 puts a little more emphasis in the water efficiency and indoor environmental quality categories, with each gaining 1 point. The materials and resources lost 1 point, and energy and atmosphere category lost 2 points, but continue to be worth the most total points. Although USGBC continues to educate the green building community to look beyond just points, LEED points still drive design decision and procurement behavior. The points, no matter how we tackle challenges, change is inevitable. With a new version of LEED comes opportunities. The earlier you learn and gain experience with this new version, the better your performance will be. We'll take some time to explain major changes from the organization level. Now it's time to get into specific changes within LEED v4. Charlie, could you start by explaining the new credit categories for us?
Sure. As we mentioned earlier, integrative process is a new category. It certainly deserves a few slides to explain a little bit further. The intent of this category is to support high-performance, cost-effective project outcomes through an early analysis of the green design and construction strategies. For project teams working in healthcare, the integrative process is a prerequisite. Beginning in the programming and pre-design phase, the 4 processes shown here must be implemented to meet this prerequisite. All rating systems, including healthcare, can achieve 1 credit point for implementation of the integrative design process. However, the requirements to achieve credit are different from the requirements for the healthcare prerequisite. The biggest difference is that project teams must perform preliminary analysis before the completion of schematic design that explores how to reduce both water and energy loads while also accomplishing their related sustainability goals. Let's look at energy first. Project teams will be required to assess at least 2 of the energy systems shown here. The requirement is to use a simple box energy model to explore alternative options outside of industry standards. The simple box model can utilize a basic schematic building form that advises the project team on the building's likely distribution of energy. For example, the project team would comply with the energy side of the integrative process credit if they analyze both site conditions, such as shading, and envelope attributes, such as increased insulation. The other half of the integrative process credit is water-related systems. Project teams will need to perform a preliminary water budget analysis before the completion of schematic design that explores how to reduce potable water loads in the building. The 4 areas that need to be assessed are indoor and outdoor water demands, process water demands, and supply sources. To achieve credit, project teams must document how their early analysis of energy and water systems was incorporated into the final design, or at the very least, guided them to the decisions they made. Next, John will take us through the updates to location and transportation.
As Chris mentioned earlier, for version 4, the old sustainable sites category has been split into 2 categories. The first is a new one named location and transportation, and the second retains the old name sustainable sites. Within this new location and transportation category, you can earn points in the traditional manner by meeting the requirements of the credits listed on the right-hand side of this slide. But in version 4, LEED introduced a simplified path shown on the left-hand side. If the project location is in an area that has already been certified through the LEED for Neighborhood Development rating system, then you can simply earn points based on that certification level. This chart shows the points available through this new LT credit. For example, if you're constructing a building in a neighborhood that has already received the silver level of certification through LEED ND, then your project can earn 10 points under LT Credit 1. This makes sense because going through LEED for Neighborhood Development certification involves a lot of planning for transportation and access to surrounding services. So this credit really simplifies documentation for this category and promotes building in a LEED ND location. But if the project will not be located on a LEED ND site, then you can still earn points in the traditional manner by meeting the requirements of the credits listed on the right-hand side of this slide. Note that this is an either-or decision. If you choose the simplified approach of earning points through the Credit 1 based on the LEED for Neighborhood Development score, then you're done with this category. The rating system does not allow you to earn more points through any of the other location and transportation credits. Now, while this is a new category, other than the 1 new credit for neighborhood development, the other credits in this category are similar to those found in version 3. But you'll notice that they've all been renamed in version 4. For example, the first one listed here, the old site selection credit, was renamed to sensitive land protection. Now, due to limited time, I'm not going to discuss all these credits, but I will point out a few changes to the bicycle facility and green vehicle credits, since they may have an impact on the plumbing or electrical systems, which some of your firms may also design. In the past, critics of LEED would often joke that you could earn a point just for installing bike racks, even if the building was located out in the middle of nowhere. For version 4, the credit for bicycle facilities was rewritten so that earning this point now depends on the site. The building must be located within 200 yards of a bicycle transportation network that connects to various services like supermarkets, pharmacies, health clubs, and so on. Now, this credit still requires bike racks or storage, but the requirements are more tailored to the type of building. And finally, it still requires showers and changing rooms, but the minimum distance from the building entrance has been removed. This allows more flexibility in building layout, as well as the plumbing system design. Other than the name, the most notable change to the green vehicles credit is that it's now only worth 1 point, compared to 3 points in the previous version. The other major change is that providing preferred parking spaces alone is no longer enough. In version 4, you must provide preferred or discounted parking for green vehicles, plus one of 2 options for refueling stations, either charging for electric vehicles or liquid or gas fueling facilities for other alternative fuel vehicles. Now, that's all the time I'm going to spend on location and transportation, so let's move on to the sustainable sites category. Chris?
Thanks, John. For sustainable site prerequisites, the reference standard have been updated to newer versions. For example, construction activity pollution prevention refers to EPA's Construction General Permit. The reference was updated to the 2012 version for LEED v4. Also, the environmental site assessment reference has been updated to new ASTM standard. As we mentioned earlier, migrating standard or references to the latest version is a common theme across all LEED categories. We'll point out the most significant changes as we go along. A new sustainable sites credit awards a point for conducting an earlier survey of the site conditions as related to topography, climate, vegetation, soils, human health, and others. Also note that the protect or restore habitat credit is worth an additional point in version 4. The rest of the credits in this category has only minor changes. Previously, stormwater quantity and quality control were separate credits. In V4, they have been combined into one credit called rainwater management, which is now worth up to 3 points. Similarly, the heat island effect credit have been combined into one credit titled heat island reduction, but the points remain the same. For HVAC engineers, you may be interested in heat island reduction and light pollution reduction credit, since these decisions will impact building energy consumption. Let's take a look at these credits. To minimize heat island effect, LEED v4 has combined the calculation methods for non-roof and roof measures along with vegetated roofs into one single credit. For non-roof measures, solar reflectance value and a new term called 3-year aged solar reflectance value are used instead of solar reflectance index. The best place to find more information is a Cool Roof Rating Council's product directory. If a specific roof is not listed, an equation is available for you to calculate that value. As an alternative, if the project wants to focus only on parking lots to reduce heat island effect, locating 75% of the parking spaces under cover can earn 1 point under this credit. Notice that this percentage is an increase from version 3. Let's move on to the credit for light pollution reduction. Here's an example Earth at night photo taken by NASA. The goal of reducing light pollution to promote night sky access, improve nighttime visibility, and improve wildlife development. The lighting power allowance that used to be part of this credit has been moved to Energy and Atmosphere section in V4. Now this credit addresses uplight, light trespass, and internally illuminated exterior signage. For uplight and light trespass, users have 2 options to select. Users don't have to use the same methods for compliance. The first option is backlight uplight glare method, known as BUG, defined by the Illuminated Engineering Society. The second option is to use calculation method. For internally illuminated signage, this credit defines maximum allowable luminance for both nighttime and daytime hours. This is all I want to cover for sustainable sites. Charlie, how about the water efficiency category?
All right. In LEED version 4, the water efficiency category is slightly restructured. USGBC has updated this section in order to cover more water end uses. They've also broken water use into 3 segments: indoor water use, outdoor water use, and cooling tower water use. The prerequisites for this category have changed. It's where we're going to look first. In LEED version 3, there is only one prerequisite, called water use reduction. Its focus is specifically on reducing the amount of indoor water use. In LEED version 4, both indoor and outdoor water use are addressed as prerequisites. The one prerequisite from LEED v3 has been renamed to indoor water use reduction, and a new prerequisite called outdoor water use reduction has been added. First, we'll discuss indoor water use reduction. The requirements are similar to those in LEED v3. However, there are 2 updates worth mentioning here. First, cooling tower water use is now addressed in the prerequisite. As a result, project teams cannot use once-through cooling with potable water. Cooling towers must be equipped with makeup water meters, and drift eliminators are required. The second change is for appliance and process water uses. Where LEED v3 did not include these end uses in its scope, LEED v4 does. There are now maximum water use rates and performance standards for specific appliances and process water uses. Moving on to the first of 2 new prerequisites, let's look at outdoor water use reduction. There are 2 options to meet this prerequisite. Project teams can either design the landscaping to require no irrigation, or reduce the amount of irrigation by 30% below calculated baseline water consumption. That baseline water consumption will be calculated using the EPA's WaterSense tool. The second new prerequisite for the water efficiency category is building level water metering. As the title implies, project teams will now be required to install permanent water meters that measure the total potable water use for the building and all the associated grounds. So altogether, project teams now have 3 prerequisites for water efficiency. Compared back to LEED v3, you'll have expanded scope for landscaping and water metering. So that's it for the prerequisites. Next, we'll look at the possible credits for water efficiency. In LEED version 3, credit 1 is water efficient landscaping. This credit has been renamed to outdoor water use reduction. Project teams will have 2 options to achieve this credit. They can either further reduce the water use for landscaping or eliminate the need for irrigation completely. The table here shows the possible point breakdowns for outdoor water use reduction. Again, like the prerequisite, the baseline water consumption is calculated using the EPA WaterSense tool. Credit 2 under water efficiency category is indoor water use reduction. For LEED version 4, this credit is a combination of LEED v3 credits, water use reduction, and process water use reduction. To achieve this credit, project teams will need to further reduce fixture and fitting water use from the calculated baseline. A 20% reduction from that baseline is required just to meet the prerequisite. Further reduction from that number will achieve credit by the point thresholds shown in this table. In LEED version 3, the percent reduction thresholds were in 10% increments. You can see this is updated to 5% increments in LEED version 4, which offers an increase in possible points for this credit. There are 2 new credit categories that make up the rest of water efficiency. The first is cooling tower water. The objective of this credit is to conserve water loss through blowdown. Blowdown is the process of replacing the cooling tower water to avoid high water concentration levels caused by evaporation. To achieve points under this credit, project teams will need to conserve cooling tower makeup water by maximizing water cycles in the cooling tower. At the same time, they'll need to avoid microbes, corrosion, and scale by keeping the cooling tower water below maximum concentration levels laid out in this table. Project teams may also be able to earn another point by metering this makeup water, which leads us into our last credit category, water metering. Remember, one of the new prerequisites requires project teams to install building level water meters. This new credit will award points for advanced water consumption tracking. There's one possible point for this credit, and it can be achieved by installing permanent water meters for 2 or more of the subsystems shown in this table. For example, if a project team monitors 80% of both irrigation water and their domestic hot water, they would achieve 1 point. Most subsystems will require the project team to meter at least 80% of the water being consumed by that specific subsystem. All right, we've now covered all the credits under water efficiency category in LEED v4. One thing to note is the lack of credit 2 from LEED version 3. The credit category name was Innovative Wastewater Techniques, and due to low participation in this credit, it's been removed from the rating system in LEED v4. Overall, the possible points for water efficiency in LEED v4 has increased by 1 or 2 points, depending on your building type. You're going to have a higher emphasis on indoor water use, as well as additional points for cooling tower water use and water metering. All right, Mick's going to walk you through the updates to energy and atmosphere.
Thanks, Charlie. The first thing you're going to see is that there's an additional prerequisite that has to do with metering. A conscious decision made by USGBC was to expand the performance monitoring and measurement portions of LEED. This was done in all sections, as we saw when Charlie covered the new water metering requirements. 2 of the other prerequisites also had some changes, so let's look at the details. From a commissioning standpoint, the normal systems must be covered. LEED v4 has also moved to industry publications as the basis for commissioning guidance. ASHRAE Guidelines 0 and 1.1 are to be used. In addition, for the first time, the building envelope or enclosure is covered by LEED. The prerequisite does not require envelope commissioning, but the commissioning agent needs to make sure it complies with the owner's project requirements and the basis of design. For the prerequisite, once the building is more than 20,000 square feet, it's required that the commissioning agent not be part of the construction team. He or she can still be part of the construction firm for the prerequisite. The basis for energy and the minimum requirement threshold have both changed from the 2007 version of 90.1 to the 2010 version. We covered 90.1 in an ENL, but I'll touch on a few high-level changes today. For all the options, 90.1 2010 mandatory requirements must be met. In the mechanical section, this includes full and part load equipment requirements, controls, insulation, and others. From a high-level standpoint, the 3 options are whole building energy modeling using Appendix G from 90.1 and being 5% more stringent for new construction. Second, using the 50% Advanced Energy Design Guides, or using a guide from the New Buildings Institute. So let's look at these options. In examining the first, we'll also look at a few of the changes in 90.1 2010. For new buildings, prerequisite option 1 is for the design building to be 5% better than a baseline building as defined by 90.1 2010 Appendix G. During public review, the threshold had begun at a 10% improvement. But USGBC decided that the changes to 90.1 2010 were significant enough that a 5% improvement is still a very good building. For major renovations, the required improvement is 3%, and for core and shell, 2%. For the 2010 version, the 90.1 committee published 109 addenda. Now, what were some of the big changes? From an envelope perspective, more fenestration is required on the south and north sides of the building than the east and west sides. There are exceptions, for example, in urban areas, or where such orientation is not possible due to lot line setbacks. Continuous air barrier requirements can be met by installing materials with a maximum air permeance level or an assembly limiting the air leakage to less than 0.04 CFM per square foot. The goal is less infiltration. Cool roofs are now required for many roofs in climate zones 1 through 3. In these hotter climates, these roofs significantly reduce the building cooling load. Finally, there are a number of addenda that span the envelope and lighting portions of the standard. So that's a great segue to the lighting addenda. Required lighting power densities are lower in almost all cases, and control requirement changes are also significant. For example, when a space becomes occupied, the automating control lighting level is 50% of design, or the occupant can use a manual on switch. There must also be a control step between 30 and 70%. Parking garage lighting controls are required, with lighting levels reduced by at least 30% when no activity is detected for a maximum of 30 minutes. And half the receptacles must be able to automatically shut off, for example, at night. For good daylighting, the windows and skylights must be properly placed on the building envelope. An example from the reference manual is shown on the screen. There were also changes to the space area thresholds at which daylighting is required. Now, a pretty major change was that once 10% of the luminaires are replaced during alteration, lighting controls must also be upgraded. There were a significant number of mechanical changes too. We'll touch on a few of the major ones. Equipment efficiency requirements changed for many categories for the 2010 version of 90.1. Note that efficiencies are mandatory and all the requirements must be met. For example, full and part load, or for heat pumps, cooling, and heating. Prescriptive requirements that changed include economizers, which are now required in all but the hottest climate. For example, Riyadh and Miami. Air-to-air energy recovery is required for systems in more climate zones and with smaller percentages of outdoor air. Control requirements have been part of 90.1 for quite some time. Recall that since 1999, fan pressure optimization has been required for most DDC VAV systems. Another long-time requirement was reducing the amount of ventilation during periods of low occupancy in high people density zones like auditoriums or conference rooms. There were some significant control upgrades to the 90.1 2010 version. The zone size and density for DCV are lower. Also, in addition to reducing zone ventilation, ventilation reduction at the location of outdoor air intake is required. This is often referred to as ventilation reset. Supplier temperature reset is also required, even on VAV systems. And changes were made to the minimum space airflows before new energy can be used for reheating of supply air. Finally, using the same methods as fan pressure optimization led the committee to require pump pressure optimization on the water side of the system. With 109 addenda, we just scratched the surface today, so you may want to review the E&L from 2010. Now, our second option to complying to the prerequisite is using the ASHRAE 50% Advanced Energy Design Guides. Let's take a look at what's required. First, both mandatory and prescriptive requirements of 90.1 2010 must be met. Then, to meet the prerequisite, the AEDG, HVAC, and surface water heating recommendations must be met. We'll look at an example in a minute. From a background standpoint, to date, ASHRAE has published 4 50% AEDGs: offices, K-12 schools, medium and big box retail, and large hospitals. All are available for free download from the site shown on the screen. Color-coded maps and recommendation tables are published for each climate zone, and recommendations are provided for the categories shown here. As an example, Climate Zone 3 covers locations such as Atlanta, Dallas, and South Carolina. For that climate zone, there's a recommendation table, and it fits on just 2 pages. Now, to meet the energy prerequisite, the HVAC and surface water heating recommendations must be followed. As an example, let's delve into the 50% large hospital AEDG. In it, 3 system types are recommended for non-surgical spaces: water source heat pumps with dedicated outdoor air, chilled water fan coil systems with dedicated outdoor air, and mixed air VAV systems with separate treatment of outdoor air. Let's take a look at a few of the mixed air VAV system recommendations. First, the chiller efficiency requirements, both heat recovery and cooling only, are pretty stringent, as are the fan power and exhaust air energy recovery effectiveness requirements. There's a lot of additional information in the HVAC tips section of the AEDGs about the chilled water system. It covers specifics such as variable primary flow and low flow or earthwise chilled water systems. In addition, it addresses using a split dehumidification unit for outdoor air treatment. The bottom line is that the 50% AEDGs can be used to satisfy the LEED v4 energy prerequisite. In addition, for some buildings less than 100,000 square feet, a third option is available to meet the energy prerequisite. This option uses the New Building Institute's Advanced Buildings Core Performance Guide as its basis. Similar to the AEDG option, the mandatory and prescriptive requirements of 90.1/2010 must be met. Some general information about this guide is shown on the slide, but we won't get into any detail today on this document. For more information, you can check out the NBI website. Now, in addition to the 3 options we just covered, building type specific requirements for retail and data centers are allowed. More information is in the handout available from your site coordinator. Now, as mentioned earlier, there's a new prerequisite to meter building energy use by type. Either building or aggregated submetering is required for all the energy uses in the building. Depending on the energy sources, this may be a significant increase in metering. And remember, this is a prerequisite. For electricity, energy use in kilowatt hours and demand in kW must both be tracked. Also, at least monthly energy data must be tracked, and the data shared with USGBC for all energy uses plus electric demand. And this must be done for 5 years. The last prerequisite in V4, fundamental refrigerant management, was not changed. It still does not allow use of CFCs, such as R11 or R12. Primarily, the prerequisite was kept because LEED is being adopted in developing countries where CFCs may still be used on non-LEED projects. Now, let's move on to the EA credit section. Energy and atmosphere is still the largest credit category in LEED projects, comprising up to 35% of the credit points. Now, there were a few reallocations within the EA section. The largest redistribution was from the on-site renewable energy area to some new credits. Let's look at some specifics. Enhanced commissioning must be done by a third party using the requirements shown on the slide. In addition, the span for the commissioning agent's involvement is from the early design phase through at least 10 months of occupancy. The measurement and verification credit portion of LEED V3 was sort of moved into the enhanced commissioning credits for LEED V4. The first option, worth 3 points, is to perform enhanced commissioning. A 4-point alternative is performing both enhanced commissioning and assessing energy and water performance. In addition, 2 points are available for envelope commissioning. Let's look at specifics for all of these options. Worth 3 points is use of ASHRAE Guideline 0 and 1.1 to perform the actions on the right side of the screen. Since his or her involvement spans a long time, the commissioning agent can ensure that design intent is met in the actual operation of the building. Now let's look at Path 2, where enhanced commissioning and assessing performance can attain 4 points. Path 2 has the same requirements as Path 1, but adds monitoring-based commissioning. Monitoring procedures must be followed with the intent to assess performance of energy and water-consuming systems. But this is not just monitoring, but evaluating, correcting, and even repairing the systems. The next option is to commission the envelope. This can be done either in conjunction with the other building commissioning or may be done independently. 2 points are available for building envelope commissioning, and it's really a big step forward. The thought process was that a properly constructed envelope will be in place for the life of the building. Proper design, construction, and installation therefore greatly affect energy and water use, as well as IAQ for that same time period. So since envelope commissioning is not generally performed today, when performed in accordance with the requirements shown on the slide, substantial credit is given. Next, optimized energy performance is similar to the energy prerequisite, but for the credit, there are only 2 options.
All right, I'll give Mick a quick breather here and take you through option 1 for optimized energy performance. Option 1 is very similar to LEED v3. To achieve optimized energy performance points, the project must be modeled and compared to a baseline building. Energy cost is still the metric, but the change is that LEED v4 uses Appendix G of ASHRAE 90.1 2010 instead of ASHRAE 90.1 2007. By exceeding the prerequisite, EA credit 2 points can be earned. The maximum number of points varies with the building type. 16 for schools, 20 for healthcare, and 18 for all other buildings. Let's build a table that shows how many credit points are achieved at different levels of energy cost savings. Recall that the prerequisite minimum performance levels are different for new construction, major renovation, and core and shell. So accruing credits begins at different percentage improvement levels. A 1% improvement in any of the construction categories begins earning points. Note that a 1% improvement for healthcare receives 3 points compared to 1 point in all other building categories. At higher savings compared to the baseline building, additional credit points are earned. As mentioned earlier, different building types max out at different possible points. Schools can earn a maximum of 16 points, healthcare a maximum of 20, and all other buildings a maximum of 18. Let's use this table to run through a quick example. For our example, the project is a core and shell office building, and the modeled energy cost savings compared to the baseline building is 17.5%. The question is, how many LEED v4 points can you earn? Using the chart, we find the core and shell column. Since it's an office rather than school or healthcare, we choose that column. We then round down to the nearest table entry and find that for 17% savings, 8 optimized energy performance points are achieved. All right, there you have it for option 1. Mick's going to walk you through option 2 for earning energy points.
Thanks, Charlie. Now, recall that the 50% AEDGs for offices, K through 12, retail, and large hospitals can be used to meet the minimum energy performance prerequisite. Also for the prerequisite, the HVAC and service water heating recommendations in the guides must be followed. But the AEDGs can also be used to gain prescriptive energy points without doing any building modeling. For those buildings covered by a 50% AEDG, 1 point can be achieved by meeting the AEDG recommendations in each category shown. So, 5 prescriptive credit points are available. In addition, meeting the retail AEDG recommendations for lighting on the sales floor can achieve a 6th credit point for medium and big box retail buildings. Okay, let's move to metering. Recall that building energy meters are a prerequisite. There's a new credit for submetering all individual energy end uses that are at least 10% of the total building annual energy consumption. Those submeters have to be permanently installed, have storage and remote access, and the capability to report energy use from hourly to annual. Also, electric meters must have these capabilities for both consumption and demand. Let's take a minute to apply the requirements for this credit to a chilled water system. In a building, the chillers, and therefore the chilled water plant, may use more than 10% of the energy. So metering is required to achieve this credit. As we discussed in our last ENL, if we only examine chiller energy use rather than the system, we may make poor decisions. With that said, for LEED V4, what needs to be submetered to achieve the credit? Here's an excerpt from the LEED V4 reference guide that gives useful direction. It states that systems, rather than discrete pieces of equipment, may be metered to achieve this credit. So in this case, the chilled water system and perhaps the condenser water system should be metered. Moving on, another new credit, demand response, can achieve either 1 or 2 points. The goal is to have an automated system that can either shed or shift load. In either case, the general requirements are the same: to have an automated and commissioned system capable of a 10% demand reduction. One example is a thermal storage to shift cooling load. In fact, for existing buildings, thermal energy storage is specifically mentioned. The difference is that 2 credit points are available if there's a contract for demand response, while only 1 point is available if there is not such a program. Renewable energy production credit points were reduced from a possible 7 points in V3 to 3 points in V4. Reallocation to the other credits we've discussed occurred. The 3 points are earned at the levels of renewable energy production shown. Solar gardens or community renewable energy systems are allowed if the project owns the system or has a lease agreement for at least 10 years, and the system is located in the same utility service area as the facility claiming the use. Enhanced refrigerant management had very few changes. The number of points went from 2 in version 3 to 1 in version 4. An additional change is that if all equipment on a project uses refrigerants with 0 ODP and less than 50 GWP, that the credit is given. If other refrigerants are used, a calculation must be performed, but there are no changes from the V3 equation. Also, LEED V3 presented some issues for retail commercial refrigeration compliance. For example, for grocery or convenience stores with refrigeration cases. So V4 allows present freezer case refrigerants to be used as long as the refrigerant charge is no more than that shown on the slide and the store-wide annual refrigerant emissions are less than 15%. The best practices guide for reducing commercial refrigeration leaks and emissions is available on the Environmental Protection Agency's Green Chill site. Finally, up to 2 points are available for purchase of green power, renewable energy credits, or carbon offsets. But the requirements of V4 are more stringent. The levels of purchase are 50% for 1 point and 100% for 2 points. In addition, the qualified resources must have come online since January 1st, 2005, and a contract for at least 5 years must be in force.
Let's move on to the materials and resources section. This section of LEED rating system has been modified extensively, so you'll want to take time to understand all the changes. For those of you who are familiar with LEED version 3, many of the same strategies have been consolidated and expanded in V4. In some cases, the thresholds to receive points are different. And in many cases, sourcing a particular product or system may require a lot of background work for documentation. In particular, you will want to make sure to update your request for proposal or request for submittal to properly reflect what information suppliers need to provide, as this will greatly improve your productivity at the stage of the project. Otherwise, you could end up spinning your wheel without gaining the information you need. Here are prerequisites in this category. The prerequisite on storage and collection of recyclables now includes specific safety measures for at least 2 types of the following products: battery, mercury-containing lamps, and electronic waste. The construction and demolition waste management prerequisite was a credit in version 3. Elevating these best practices strategies from a credit to a prerequisite helps move the needle to a higher level. To comply, waste diversion targets need to be defined, and a final report will need to be submitted. This is to set target for waste diversion and not connected to performance requirement. In addition, there is a credit that can earn up to 2 points for meeting performance requirements for waste diversion. Persistent bioaccumulative and toxic pollutants, or PBTs, are long-lasting substances that can build up in the food chain to levels that can be harmful to human health and the environment. This prerequisite applies to healthcare projects and has not been changed in V4. Moving on to the credits, there has been a lot of shuffling and renaming in this category. We will not explain many details about how these credits have changed. Too much simplification does not do justice to the work done by USGBC and the many stakeholders around the world. As shown in the slide, the 2 building reuse credits and material reuse credit have all been combined into one single new credit title as Building Lifecycle Impact Reduction. There are 4 options available for earning points. The only option that is similar to LEED version 3 is the third option that awards points for reusing structural and non-structural elements. As for another change, new requirements related to demolition activities have been added to construction waste management credit. The version 3 credits on recyclable content, regional materials, renewable materials, and certified woods are all gone. However, these strategies are included in the 3 new credits. While I have shortened the titles on this slide, these new credits share a common title of Building Product Disclosure and Optimization, making them the longest title in LEED history. In the past, product selection criteria for LEED buildings focused on single attribute, such as recycled content, regional materials, or certified wood. Mechanical, electrical, and plumbing components were excluded from these credits. In version 4, these new credits now award products that publicly disclose their life cycle environmental impact, source of raw material, or material ingredients. The idea is to start from the source. By investigating this information, we can gain a better understanding of the environmental and health impact of these products. As you can imagine, these new credits caught the attention of many building product manufacturers and were a major area of discussion during the public comment periods. Since our primary focus today is on HVAC, I will cover just one credit in a little bit more detail. But please take some time to look into these other credits as well, so that your design team can make informed decisions. With that said, I will highlight the Environmental Product Declaration credit, also known as EPD. Since the Environmental Product Declaration are still pretty new to the industry, it might be helpful to use an analogy. You can think of an Environmental Product Declaration like a nutritional label on a food product. But instead of providing information such as calorie, fat content, and carbohydrates, an EPD provides information about the environmental impact of that product, such as global warming potential, smog formation, and water use. EPDs are third-party certified reports published by product manufacturers to provide comparable information related to the environmental performance of their product. Depending on the type of product, an industry trade group may be chartered to develop a generic industry-wide EPD. The concrete and wood industries are good examples. But for complex products, a product-specific EPD makes more sense for providing meaningful data to manufacturers and the stakeholders. establishing an EPD can be quite laborious, but they can be pretty easy from the user's standpoint. Let's see how EPDs fit into a new LEED rating systems. There are 2 points available in the Environmental Product Declaration credit. To receive the first points, use at least 20 different permanent installed products sourced from at least 5 different manufacturers that meet the disclosure criteria. As shown on this slide, different types of declarations are weighted differently. For example, a product that carries an industry-wide EPD can be counted as only half a product toward the total requirement of 20. You can see that third-party declarations are worth more than self-declarations. To earn the second point under this credit, at least 50% of the products based on cost need to meet criteria demonstrating their environmental impact reduction in at least 3 environmental categories. Products that are extracted, manufactured, and purchased within 100 miles of the project site are valued at twice the product cost. In summary, the first point in this credit is based on the number of products. The second point is based on the cost of those products demonstrating compliance. You may wonder where to find products that with EPD declarations, and are there any HVAC products that have received EPD certifications? The LEED Reference Guide provides a list of useful resources to find EPD programs. One of those programs is operated by Institute for Construction and Environment in Germany. The URL is listed at the bottom of this slide. There are over 500 EPD products listed on that website, including Trane's Earthwise Centrovac centrifugal chiller, the first EPD certified air conditioning product in the world. Hopefully, this helped you start with your effort in gathering EPD products for future LEED projects. That's all the time that we have allotted for material and resources category. John, our audience must be eager to find out what's been changed in IEQ section. Can you elaborate for us?
I can. Like the other sections of the LEED rating system, the indoor environmental quality category has been reorganized for version 4, and some of the requirements have been made more stringent. And because we have limited time, I'm going to focus on those changes that have the most impact on the HVAC design team. Starting with the prerequisites, the EQ section still has the same primary prerequisites. Minimum IEQ performance, which is basically complying with ASHRAE Standard 62.1, and dealing with environmental tobacco smoke. In addition, LEED for Schools has one more prerequisite focused on acoustics, which I'll discuss a bit later. The first major change to the minimum IEQ performance prerequisite is updating the reference to the 2010 version of Standard 62.1 instead of the 2007 version. As in the past, a project must meet all the requirements listed in sections 4 through 7, which means complying with more than just the ventilation rates. Now, LEED allows you to use either the ventilation rate procedure or the new natural ventilation procedure, but use of the IEQ procedure is not allowed. The second major change to this prerequisite is that it now requires monitoring. In the previous version of LEED, outdoor air delivery monitoring was a credit worth 1 point. In version 4, the monitoring part of that old credit is now required as part of this prerequisite. For a mechanical ventilation system with variable airflow, this means you need to directly measure outdoor airflow, like with a Trane track damper. For a system with constant volume airflow, you can use air balancing and a fan proving switch. Now, for a natural ventilation system, you can either directly measure exhaust airflow, use indicators on the ventilation openings, or monitor carbon dioxide in each zone. Now let's step back and discuss the 2010 version of ASHRAE 62.1. There were lots of changes between the 2007 and 2010 versions, but I'll try to summarize the most significant changes that might affect a typical LEED project. First is a new requirement for air cleaning of fine particles. In those areas where the outdoor concentration of particulate matter, 2.5 microns and smaller, exceeds the national standard, well then Standard 62 now requires the use of a MERV 11 filter. And for those areas that exceed the average daily maximum level for ozone, an ozone air cleaner is now required. In your handouts, I've included maps from the US EPA which indicate the parts of the country affected. And I've also included the URLs for finding the latest data in maps. The next change is related to demand-controlled ventilation. Standard 62 has always allowed zone outdoor airflow to be dynamically reset based on changing zone population. But in the 2010 version, more specific requirements were added to explain how demand-controlled ventilation is to be implemented. Next, prescriptive requirements have been added for natural ventilation. These focus on the required location and size of the openings versus the floor area to be ventilated, as well as controls needed to coordinate operation of the natural and mechanical ventilation systems. One key part of this new natural ventilation procedure is that it requires mixed mode or a hybrid approach for most applications. Here's an excerpt from that standard. It states that when natural ventilation is used, the building shall also include a mechanical system to ensure proper ventilation whenever the natural ventilation openings are closed. Now there are a few exceptions. For example, if the openings are permanent and not able to be closed, or if they're automatically controlled and those controls prevent the openings from closing during any occupied periods, then a separate mechanical ventilation system would not be required. A few final changes to note. The 2010 version clarifies the minimum exhaust requirements in Table 6-4 apply regardless of which design procedure is used. In the previous version of the standard, this table was only referenced in the ventilation rate procedure. The standard also simplified the separation requirements for intake and exhaust locations. It now uses the air classes which are defined and used in other parts of the standard. And finally, the calculations used for the ventilation rate procedure have been further clarified. Now last year we produced an ENL on this 2010 version of ASHRAE Standard 62.1. In it we walked through these calculations in detail and explained many of the other requirements in this standard. So now it's time to move on to the credits in this indoor environmental quality section. Now I already mentioned that the outdoor air delivery monitoring credit is gone, since most of the monitoring requirements are now part of the prerequisite. For version 4, the remaining part of this monitoring credit, along with the increased ventilation and indoor source control credits, have all been consolidated into a single new credit titled Enhanced IEQ Strategies. In version 3, you could earn 1 point for outdoor air delivery monitoring, 1 point for increased ventilation, and 1 point for indoor source control. But with version 4, these have all been combined into a single credit worth either 1 or 2 points. Now there are 2 options for earning points in this credit. Using option 1, you could earn 1 point by meeting all the requirements that were essentially part of the old indoor source control credit. Permanent entryway systems to capture dirt brought in on shoes, local exhaust where hazardous chemicals are being used or stored, and MERV 13 filtration of the outdoor air. Do all 3 and you earn this 1 point. In addition, using option 2, you can earn 1 more point by implementing any one of several IEQ strategies listed. For example, one of the choices is the same as the old increased ventilation credit. That is, if you design the system so that the breathing zone ventilation rates are 30% higher than standard 62.1, you can earn this 1 additional point. Or you can choose to monitor CO2 in each densely occupied space. In total, there are 4 strategies to choose from under this option 2. So if you comply with any one of them, you earn this 1 additional point. Let's return to the list of EQ credits. For version 4, the old Construction IEQ Management Plan credit has been split into 2 parts, with the second part having been renamed IAQ Assessment. For the first part, the requirements during construction basically remain the same as in version 3. And as with the previous version, this credit can earn the project 1 point. The second credit, now named IEQ Assessment, still has 2 options for earning points. Option 1, which is worth 1 point, involves flushing out the building with outdoor air prior to occupancy. The flush-out process is essentially unchanged, but version 4 did clarify the indoor temperature and humidity limits that must be maintained during this process. And movable furnishings must be in place before the flush-out begins. Or you can choose to use option 2, which in version 4 is now worth 2 points. This approach involves sampling and testing the air prior to occupancy. In addition to being worth an extra point, the new version modified option 2 to include more contaminants that need to be tested for. Let's look at the rest of the EQ credits. Again, you'll notice some reorganization. In version 3, the Controllability of Systems credit had 2 parts, thermal comfort and lighting. The lighting part of this old controllability credit was renamed Interior Lighting in version 4, while the thermal comfort part of this old credit was consolidated with the other 2 thermal comfort credits into a single credit titled Thermal Comfort. Now, that was confusing, so hopefully this will help clarify. In version 3, you could earn 1 point for thermal comfort design, 1 point for thermal comfort verification, and 1 point for controllability of thermal comfort. In version 4, these 3 have been consolidated into a single credit worth 1 point. The requirements for design are nearly the same. The project has to meet ASHRAE Standard 55, but the reference was updated to the 2010 version of that standard. However, in version 4, the requirements for verification of thermal comfort have been removed. So a permanent monitoring system and conducting an occupant survey are no longer required to earn this credit. Finally, the requirements for controllability are essentially the same, but have now been grouped in with this same credit. So the result is that there are fewer points available in the thermal comfort category. The last credit I want to focus on is new for lots of building types. In version 3, both LEED for schools and LEED for healthcare had a credit for acoustic performance. For version 4, this credit now applies to all building types except retail. Starting with schools. In version 3, LEED had a prerequisite and a credit worth 1 point. The same is true for version 4, but the requirements are now more stringent. For example, to meet the prerequisite, the background sound level from the HVAC systems in classrooms and core learning spaces must be 40 dBA or less, compared to 45 in the previous version. And to earn the 1 credit point, the background sound level must be even quieter, 35 dBA or less. The reference to ANSI Standard 1260 was updated to the 2010 version. But since the requirements for reverberation time and sound transmission class did not change between the 2002 and 2010 versions of that standard, there's really not much impact there. But a more significant change is that version 4 now requires exterior noise sources to be considered as well. So if the school is located within a half mile of a significant noise source, like a highway, industrial facility, rail line, or flight path, then you need to take measurements at the site. If the measured sound level exceeds a defined threshold, then you need to implement strategies that will reduce noise transmission from outside. Moving on to healthcare buildings, the requirements of this acoustic credit are essentially unchanged. And for this building type, a project can earn up to 2 points. The major impact here is that in version 4, this credit is now available to use for most other building types as well, not just schools and healthcare. To earn the 1 point for this credit, all the occupied spaces in these other buildings need to meet the corresponding background sound levels listed in the ASHRAE handbook, as well as the reverberation times and STCs published in the LEED rating system. And finally, if the project will include sound reinforcement or masking systems, this credit includes requirements for how those systems are to be designed. Mick?
Thanks, John. Before we get to some modeling changes, we'll cover additional credits available. In LEED, they're referred to as innovation credits and regional priority credits. Sometimes project teams come up with great new ways to provide sustainable or green building technologies. That is, they're innovative. Up to 5 innovation points are available to each project. In addition to project teams being able to come up with their own ideas, the U.S. Green Building Council developed a pilot credits library so that the same innovations can be used on multiple projects. The intent of this library is to test credit language or alternative compliance paths for such technologies or concepts. As long as the project team has not used all the innovation points, these credits are open for LEED users on a pilot basis. The present pilot credits can be viewed online. So, how do pilot credits make it into the system? Ideas can be submitted by members, but to avoid monopolization, only one proposal per member is allowed. They are then reviewed by USGBC staff, the appropriate committees, for example, the Indoor Environmental Quality Technical Advisory Group, as well as the Special Pilot Credits Working Group. Following that, they may be included in the library. Any of the pilot credits can be used for one of the available innovation points, and up to 4 pilot credits can be used. In addition, successful implementation by multiple projects may result in these pilot credits becoming regular credits in the next version of LEED. This is how the materials transparency, demand response, and cooling tower water use credits made their way into V4. Now let's move on to regional priority credits. The concept of regional priority credits was introduced in the LEED V3 rating systems to incentivize the achievement of credits that address geographically specific environmental priorities. Each regional council defines 6 pre-selected credits for that region. A project may earn up to 4 regional points out of the 6 available. If your project earns 1 of the credits listed in the RP list, then you get an additional bonus credit. In the United States, the regional credits are found using the project zip code. For other locations, RP credits are listed by country. As of now, the LEED V4 regional priority credits aren't on the USGB website yet. Okay, Charlie, you've got some additional information about certification help.
All right. There's obviously a lot of time that gets invested into pursuing LEED certification. One of the more time-consuming aspects is using modeling software to show your increased dollar savings over a baseline building. When it comes to modeling for LEED, here are some of the hurdles that must be overcome. Both your proposed design and baseline require time and accurate input into a modeling software. If you've ever done this, you know it's no small task. Users need multiple resources, including ASHRAE standards, modeling guides, and LEED Online to help complete a project. On top of all that, users need extensive knowledge in the modeling software itself, as well as any other tools required to select and show equipment and system performance. Now, there are many tools out there to help you along the way. One of those tools is Trace 700. We'll take a look at 2 new features that can help users who are modeling for LEED. The first is called the LEED Guide. It's an on-screen, step-by-step modeling guide. As the user clicks through different windows and tabs in the program, the LEED Guide updates with modeling information pertinent to that screen. Now, although simple, what this has done is gathered scattered information from multiple resources and put it into one easily accessible tool. The LEED Guide takes some of the knowledge burden off the user and limits the back and forth between the modeling software and external resources. It also provides common examples and modeling tips that helps the user through complex LEED requirements. The second feature is the baseline building creator. Just as it sounds, this tool builds a baseline building for the user following instructions laid out by Appendix G of ASHRAE 90.1. The user will first need to model their proposed building as they normally would. Once complete, a baseline alternative can be created using the baseline building creator. What this tool does is it automates the input of 90.1 minimally compliant construction types, as well as all the other features noted here. Currently, the baseline building creator uses ASHRAE Standard 90.1 2007. However, there are updates in the works to make this creator comply with ASHRAE Standard 90.1 2010 and therefore LEED version 4. Keep in mind, project teams can register for certification under LEED v3 until June 1st of 2015.
Well, that brings us to the end of our overview of LEED v4. Version 4 went live at Greenbuild this past November, so it's available to use now. Prior to the launch, USGBC held a beta period where 112 projects tested the new rating system and tools to ensure a successful release. As Charlie mentioned, LEED 2009 is not going away just yet. It'll continue to be available to use for new LEED projects until June 1st, 2015. As you can see, green construction continues to grow. If you're involved in projects, you already know that early investment in research and education with regard to green building or LEED resources will pay off in the long run. Make sure you seek out reputable resources, learn local and/or state green building codes, look for incentives from government or local utilities. These can be critical parts of justifying the life cycle cost of a project. Learn ASHRAE standards such as 189, 90.1, 62.1, and 55 to help you accurately apply them in your projects. This is especially true for LEED projects. As you heard, many of the credit requirements refer to these standards directly. We learned today that energy and IEQ continue to play a large role in LEED, and we learned that water conservation will continue to increase in importance. Whether your project is LEED local or global, all the information we provided today will be applicable. As always, we have quite a few resources that expand on today's topic, including the ASHRAE Standard 62.1 and 90.1 E&L programs that we mentioned earlier, as well as 2 recently published engineers' newsletters. A bibliography detailing these resources is included in your handout. Additionally, all past broadcasts are available on DVD at trane.com/ENL. All are accredited for continuing education, and many are available on demand, free of charge. Visit trane.com/continuing education for a complete list to satisfy credentialing requirements. And like this program, many are LEED specific. Remember to fill out a survey and let us know how we're doing. And AIA members, please remember to turn in your member information to your local site coordinator. Finally, ask your local host about details for the remaining 2014 Engineers Newsletter Live programs. In spring, we'll discuss applying variable refrigerant flow, and we'll be back in fall to discuss chilled water terminal systems. We hope you'll join us again, and thanks for your time today.